introduction, and we're going to jump straight into Stars in Shadow. I'm joined by Sven, who is the main designer, main developer on Stars in Shadow. And Stars in Shadow released last January, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of extra sound again, since we turned that off for all the other parts. And if you have any questions for Sven, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to try and cover them. We're going to be talking a bit about the game, what's happened since release, what can we expect after release perhaps, and generally looking back perhaps on the early access period of the game. So Sven, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be here.
And let's jump in. I'm just going to jump into a new game. So, Sven, your game released in early access last year and just came out of early access, or released out of early access last month. What has changed over the early access period to the game?
Well, I mean, it's been a long time since EA. It feels like a very long time since EA. But if you're just asking since release, I mean, the last big patch was all the stuff that we added for the refit mechanics. People have been asking for refit queuing and so on, and that finally went in. We reorganized a lot of the UIs, we cleaned up a lot of the UIs around Planet Production, in part in response to some of the suggestions we've been getting on the forums, and I think that's just a nice bit of extra polish in those UIs. The big piece that went out since EA was the patch that we had for the all the Super Dreadnought hulls, which included a Super Dreadnought event. So there's a new special system that's got a Super Dreadnought in it that you can explore and perhaps even reverse engineer Super Dreadnought technologies if you can manage to capture the starship. So that's a neat piece, and it's a nice art asset. We were very happy to get that in.
Alright, so in the meantime, I just loaded up a new game. Sven, could it be that my sound from Skype is not going over your headphones but over your speakers?
Oh no, is that the case? Are we getting a weird loop?
Because I'm getting a slight loop myself. I'm not sure if any of
Yes, it's not going over my headphones, you're right. Oh, shoot. Skype.
So that would be one mystery solved. In the meantime, let me just explain for those of you who are completely new to Stars in Shadow what type of game we're dealing with here. We're very much dealing with a 4X strategy game, science fiction of course, so we're set into a distant future with alien races, and actually the human race makes an appearance as well, and they all have their claim to dominate the stars, as it were. So you start out on a single planet, there are lots of solar systems around you, you can start discovering, you can start checking out, and of course colonizing, and that way you're going to expand slowly and eventually of course become, if you play well enough, the supreme ruler of the universe. Give me 1 second please. Alright, I've been told that my volume is not really high enough, so let me just try if I can rebalance it a bit better. The joys of live streaming. Let's see, can we get... Let's see if this will work. So in the meantime, let's continue playing. And okay, so I just started my first turn. I have my colony ship. I send my scout over to a nearby system, to a unexplored red giant. I need to choose my research. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm playing the Ural faction. Sven, could you tell us a bit about the difference in the races and how you try to, or how you manage to make them all play unique, or in a very unique way?
I mean, the really big difference is that they all have their own set of starships. So the Ural in particular Um, they've got a few heavy hulls, but really they have early game a lot of destroyer hulls that they can unlock, and some of the Ural destroyer hulls have slots for heavy weapons, and most of them have slots for torpedoes. So you can do some really interesting things with big fleets of small ships as the Ural. Um,
Do you have a personal favorite amongst the different races?
well, I mean, I mean, you get favorites in different ways, right? So I really like the character art that we've done for the Fidi. I think that's a lot of fun. I really like the original ship art that we did for the Ashdar. That's been around for a long time, and I'm a real fan of that. Um, I like some of the strange and terrible gameplay mechanics we've got for the Gremax. So yeah, I would say at this point I don't really have a favorite. I have things that I quite like about all the races.
Okay, and there are quite a number to discover. I mean, amongst aside from the major races, of course, there are also a ton of minor races. I just found one type of race on a Terran planet right here. They look to be a bit like a yellow blob.
Yes, they are bad news.
That's a shame, because otherwise it would be a very nice planet to.
It is a shame. This is something that we often get people people upset about on the forum, because they get these wonderful peach planets, and oh no, there's this goo on it that makes it that much more difficult to deal with. And yep, that's more or less working as intended. That is supposed to be a problem, that there's goo on that planet. Intelligent goo.
Intelligent goo. Okay, so we're gonna not colonize that for now, but we might come back at a later stage. So talking about people, talking about stuff in the forums, I mean, so far I feel like the forums for Stars and Shadow are very active. We're a very reactive community, I should say. So how do you
and many great ideas.
And many great ideas. How do you manage those, or the people themselves, and the ideas that come from them?
Well, I mean, we listen. Even when we're not writing back to everything that's posted on these forums, we listen, and there's a lot of really excellent ideas that I'm seeing about. Often just small, clever refinements that we can make to one part of the UI or another to make the game a little more streamlined. Also, there are like large ideas that people have that are things that perhaps would have to wait for a sequel or something else. But in general, we have a lot of people who I think have a good sense of what can be done to improve the game relatively realistically. And we're continuing to follow up on that kind of stuff as and when we can.
All right. Sorry. In the meantime, I'm getting told that my sound is still very low for some particular reason. I'm gonna try and talk louder and move it up closer to my mouth. I don't think there are any settings I can tweak further. So if I'm screaming in your ear, Sven, I'm sorry.
Right.
So, all right. So we're going to continue with our game. Thanks for the comment, guys. And again, if you have any questions for Sven, feel free to drop them in the chat here, and we'll get to them. How do you think, Sven, that actually? I mean, obviously, this game has been playable and has been in beta and then in early access for like a very long time. How do you feel like the main game, or the meta game, or the gameplay itself has changed over time because of balance changes or new technologies being implemented? So,
I mean,
to say if someone would
the
come
flow
back
we've
from
seen
this,
more recently, which makes me a little embarrassed actually, is I think the game actually got easier for a while we were in EA, because at the start of EA we had pushed a bunch of new features, and the AI wasn't really that good at dealing with them. So the AI was making poor choices in terms of where it was building tanks. It was making poor choices in terms of how much it was investing in its trade fleet, and we were and the AI was playing relatively honestly. So the consequences of those poor choices was that it tended to have small fleets, or it would go bankrupt. Um, it was still, a pretty playable game, and it was still potentially a challenge for the player, particularly on the harder difficulties. But it wasn't as hard as it had actually been pre-EA. So in the latest patch, we fixed some of those big bugs. Well, I mean, not really bugs. They were significant suboptimalities in the choices that the AI was making. So it's now managing its resources somewhat better, and the result is that people have noticed that the difficulty has gone up a bit, and yeah, that's working as intended. That's getting the difficulty back closer to where it was even before the start of EA, back when we had a somewhat less game that was less feature rich, but that was more well, that had an EA that a game that had an AI that was capable of handling a less feature rich game. That's always the trouble, right? As if you add new mechanics, you need to really teach the AI how to handle those new mechanics, or else you end up, as a consequence of adding the mechanic, effectively nerfing the AI. So we had a few lingering things like that we hadn't caught that we were able to catch in the latest post-release patch.
Okay, and when talking about those new features, I mean, so many were added also during the EA phase. I mean, post EA, you mentioned the post release, you mentioned the Super Dreadnought, but of course we had tons of like unique factions, technologies being unlocked during EA, like the ancient Stargates or the FIDI being able to actually hire ships from other races to fight for them. And all these things to teach the AI to use them. I can imagine that would bring some issues to them, but it seems like you guys managed to do so very well in the end.
Yeah, and it's a continuing process. I mean, a good one that is a relatively easy fix for the AI that I'm hoping we'll get sooner rather than later is to teach it to make better use of mercenaries, because mercenaries are a very powerful mechanic. And I think the FIDI AI in particular would be a lot more competitive if we just if we just taught it a little how to exploit their main racial ability. Stargates are another one where right now the AI is not using it as well as it should be.
Is there a particular reason for that? When
fleet routing is complicated, right. Basically. Okay. I mean, when you have a large empire and a lot of different starships, and you're trying to figure out where you want to get them to, and how to queue up the move orders so that they all arrive at about the same time. That's a problem that is simple in a static universe, but it gets harder when you have fleets that are retreating, or enemy fleets that come up and cause trouble, or other ships that are still being produced, or so on and so forth. So that logic right now doesn't handle the case of I've built a new Stargate, and so I now have the ability to move someplace in exactly one turn. So that's a whole new set of rules that we'd need to allow the AI to anticipate to some degree before it could really use Stargates well. It's not a huge patch, but it's one more small thing that if and when it gets added, I think you'll see some of the Ashtar factions being that much more competitive against the Ural in AI versus AI combat.
Right, I mean, because this is obviously a single player game, so really only chance to properly test the balance is to see the AI versus AI.
Yeah, well, you see it to some degree just as an emergent behavior, because you know who your biggest threats are. Right. Right. I mean, when you're playing the Ural, right now are probably not going to be, or well, yeah, I think at the current power level, the Ural are usually trouble if they're played by the AI. The Orson are less likely to be trouble if they're played as the AI. I wouldn't be super concerned about those two scouts I just saw coming in from the Ural Empire there. Um, um, I mean, part of that is that Ural have difficulty just because the planet types that they do well on are relatively rare, and that makes it relatively unlikely that the Ural will be able to really thrive and spread out over the galaxy. They can certainly be dangerous if they get a nice cluster of good worlds and turn out their starships, or if you give them enough time to tech up so that they can get some environmental tech. But probabilistically, it's generally the Ural and the Ashtar that you really need to watch out for, because they'll expand more quickly early game.
So picking one of them actually already makes your game a bit easier.
It already makes your game a bit easier, yeah, because you don't have to worry about Ural.
So right now I'm going to use some of these unique hulls. So I got the advanced destroyer right here, and I'm going to add some torpedoes to the design. I mean, the design screen is also some screen that had a major overhaul since the early days.
Yeah, if you go down to the hardpoints drop-down, you've got auto design features now. So you can actually access some of the auto design that's used by the AI to create its designs if you don't want to micromanage every slot. You have the ability to filter components, so that list isn't quite as intimidating. And you can jump. If you open up these same screens in refit mode, there's a feature that some people are finding hard to find, but others are definitely discovering, which is if you're refitting, you can choose under the hardpoints dropdown any of your existing designs as the spec to refit to, rather than needing to move in all the parts by hand. So, yep.
So that's a lot of new stuff. So still, like I said before, a lot of feedback is coming in. So what do you have planned for the coming months when it comes to supporting the game?
I mean, there's a lot of smaller balance and UI things. If you read through if you read through the very long suggestion threads, you will see a lot of small and I think rather clever ideas about how to improve the flow of gameplay, and we're going to keep chipping away at those lists as we can. There's some bigger things in the works as well, and I'm not sure how many of the bigger things I should announce at this point, but I'll say that there will be some larger items to come out in the weeks and months ahead, and we will probably do a post pretty soon on the forums that is a more formal announcement of just when and what you should be expecting.
So actually, I just ran into a super dreadnought.
Yes.
62% hull integrity. So I can't seem to do anything with it now, but something tells me I will be able to once I meet certain criteria. So what's the deal with these the ancient guardians?
Well, so this is an ancient guardian. So it's an automated defense system, and it will attack anyone who comes into the star system. It's thousands of years old and a little eccentric. So you have a few options. I mean, there's a fairly nice planet there. It's nice because if you click on that star system, you may notice that one of the planets has androids on it, which is yet another little minor race.
All right, and 3 factories already built.
3 factories already built, and ancient artifacts, and androids. So even though it's a glacier world, there's a lot to like about that planet. Um, and so if you build a strong enough fleet and you wipe out the and you wipe out the super dreadnought, you'll get access to that planet, which of course is great. But if you're clever, you'll you can also build some ships with the Ural, actually, because the Ural aren't as good at ship capture. It's a little trickier. It's easier with Ashtar humans. But if you can build some ships with some assault shuttles, you could probably capture that wounded super dreadnought. And of course, there's all sorts of interesting technologies on the super dreadnought that if you can capture a specimen, you can reverse engineer.
Right, because I see it's packed chock full of weapons, artillery,
Yeah,
strike fighters.
all kinds of great goodies.
Yes, this is something you would
and
want. An auto repair system even in there, which
Yep.
is not working, but you know.
Which is not working. It's 100% destroyed, the auto repair system. But your techs could potentially salvage something if they could get a hold of it.
Something at your top. I want this to be my farming planet because of the super weed. So we're gonna make that the farm of my empire.
The breadbasket.
First destroyer, or my first advanced destroyer, but of course I ran out of minerals to build a second one, so I need to keep expanding a bit more and start building some mines actually.
Yeah, or rush some mines. I mean, I find having a dedicated mining planet, particularly if you can upgrade to the mining activity tech. So when you've got that activity, you can double your metal output on a planet that has a bunch of mines on it. There's generally a lot of rewards for specialization, and as you get deeper into tech tree, you can unlock even more rewards for specialization. As you get access to some of these activities, like the mining activity and the trading activity. And I think that's a component of the game that's working pretty well. We had really wanted to make sure that that your planets kept and actually that your planets would develop more individual characters. And I think right now they are. I mean, you're going to tend to want to have a farming planet and a mining planet and production planet, and specialization helps.
Yes, and I need to build a new colony ship for that. In the meantime, there is a question in the chat from BitGamerX. He says, I joined late, but any discussion about implementing a tech tree? So this is obviously something that has been discussed more than once. Can you tell us anything about the plans for that?
It's very much on our radar. It's one of the overwhelming. It's one point of overwhelming consensus in all of the feedback that we've gotten that a lot of people would really like to see a more traditional tech tree. And we have some mock-ups, and I think the question right now is when rather than if we're going to get this in, and there's still some things to be decided about just how exactly it's going to work and how you're going to get into it and so on and so forth. But it's high up on the list of post-release features.
All right, that sounds good. I think BetGamer will be happy to hear that. So at the moment, if we're going to talk about the tech tree anyway, so at the moment we got this list right over here where we can see the text we haven't researched yet, and we can actually research, and we got the text we already have unlocked. At the bottom, there are of course a lot more texts that are behind, or technologies that are behind these, but you can always, for those of you who don't know that, select the individual categories to get a full breakdown of what they will do, and you can even select your research that's later in the tree actually, and queue it up, and it will automatically find the quickest path to unlocking that specific technology. So definitely there are ways to plan ahead more your text if that's what you're after.
Yeah, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of features. I think it's not as traditional interface as some people have seen, and having another option. So right now we have the list view, but having a tree view that you could jump into would be an extra piece that clearly people would like, and I think it's doable.
I'm gonna let's see your type. No, keep building farms. So my dedicated farming role is doing pretty well. Obviously, farms are constructed a lot quicker than many of the other buildings. I also built a couple of extra transports so I can actually move that food around when needed, though I'm not yet in that position, but...
Yeah, so instead they're making money for you, which is not a bad thing.
Which is always a good thing anyway, that's true. I probably should get some deflector screens out there. They're always nice. Variable do research, that's fine. I really need to get my mines going. So let's make this our mining planet.
Yeah, and if you're going to be tricky and try and capture that super dreadnought, you could get yourself the boarding pods check and just try and capture it by hand with well armored Ural destroyers. But I suspect you would take very heavy losses
I think
because.
So.
Because even while it is damaged, there's still primary beams on there, and if you had to close with small Ural destroyers, I think it would probably be a mess.
Yes, I think it's a bit too risky, though it would be very cool to do. Obviously, it's a bit too risky for now. I want to fight more wars after this particular one. In addition, since you told me that this thing is ancient and has been around for I don't know how long, chances are it will be around for a little bit longer. So
yes, it will probably wait until you can get into mid game and perhaps afford to lose a few destroyers.
Yes, exactly. So all right. So I rushed my mining world a bit by sending a couple of extra or some extra population there. Should probably send a bit more.
Yeah, at a design level, mines and farms are both relatively cheap because we want them to be able to be more or less affordable even on small population worlds. That's not true for factories or labs. The cost scaling and their productivity with population is such that if you're going to have a few factories and labs, you really do want to have a larger world to support it. But for a mining world or a farming world, you can often get away with much smaller populations. Early game, though, of course, yeah, if you can get up to 2 or 3, that's better than 1.
Obviously, so Viral is doing some more research while we're trying to get our levels up. I want to build a couple of extra destroyers. I designed them with, some torpedoes and some missiles, so good for the initial strike, but when they run out of ammo, probably best to retreat.
Yep, time to run away and reload. It's the old Mongolian strategy. Works well.
So let's see. So we could start doing the boarding tactics for when eventually we want to
Yeah, I'm not sure that's honestly a great plan. I think you will probably fry terribly if you go after.
Yes.
If you try and force a super dreadnought this early game.
So can you tell us a bit about the boarding? How exactly does it work when you're in combat?
Yeah, there's it's another piece that became quite a bit more complex after we finished EA. So in the release build, there were a lot of new boarding mechanics. If you have no technology that's related to boarding, the rule is that the ship that you want to board has to be immobilized, so you have to have destroyed its engine system, which is relatively difficult to do. Doesn't happen that often. But if you have an immobilized enemy any starship of yours can fly over, and if its tactical tiles are overlapping the tactical tiles of the immobilized enemy, then you can send over Marines and possibly capture the ship. So that's the base mechanic that everyone starts with. Early game, you have access to this mechanic called boarding pods, and if you research boarding pods and put a boarding pod on one of the hard points of your ships, that gives your Marines the ability to launch a boarding action against even a mobile enemy. You still have to be at range 0, so you still have to be overlapping. But it means that you have the option of using of making a specialized fleet and using boarding more aggressively and consistently. So that's your tier 0, your tier 1, tier 2. If you get assault shuttles and put assault shuttles on a carrier or a troop ship or something else, then you can actually start to send your Marines against enemies at range, and that again makes a significant change for sort of how practical it is to use boarding and ship capture as a strategy. The downside to assault Marines is that, the downside to assault shuttles is that they can be interrupted by point defense. So your Marines will all die horribly if you send your assault shuttles out against enemies who still have active point defense. They'll all end up getting shot down before they can land. But if you do something else to get rid of the point defense, if you send in some fighters or some missiles or something to soak that up, then assault shuttles start to be pretty effective. The other interesting thing about assault shuttles is that if you have ground troops that are embarked on the ship, they'll increase your ship's crew value, so you become that much stronger as in terms of your ability to launch boarding actions. And then very late game, we of course have transporters. And so functionally having a transporter system on a starship is basically like having assault shuttles, except you don't have to worry about point defense. You can just beam over instantly. So yeah, it's a fairly complex subsystem. There's a lot going on with boarding, and as you tech up, you can unlock a number of different abilities.
Right, yeah, it sure sounds like there's a whole lot going on. I think that's something that many people are finding actually while playing the game for the first couple of hours, is that there's generally in the various systems a whole lot there than you might initially think. Of course, the good thing about the game system is that also you don't have to deal with those things if you don't want to. So if you want to keep it relatively straightforward, you don't have to start capturing enemy ships. You just put some railguns in there and shoot everything that.
Yes, and solve your problem in a more direct manner. Yeah, I mean that's very much working as intended. It's a universe to explore, and you can explore along a number of different vectors. If you want to really get into the depths of tactical combat, feel free. If you want to really get into the depths of boarding and so on, there's a lot of cool stuff there. But it's there to be discovered, like so many other bits and pieces.
In the meantime, I actually managed to meet the Orphan, and we're in first-time diplomacy, so we just exchanged embassies, and I'd like to ask them for a trade charter. See if they agree. There we go.
Yeah, the Orson generally are not as enthused about any kind of agreement as most of the other races. There are some numbers there that make them. I mean, they're isolationists. They would rather.
Right.
Yeah. As you can see in their text, I'm reading the Orson
All
text
right.
over your shoulder. They're not huge fans, and they're never particularly enthusiastic, and that's reflected in the numbers. So it costs more influence to make a trade agreement with Orson. They're much less likely to ask to have new agreements than most other races would be.
I mean, that is something obviously to take note of for me. Also, since so far they're the only other race that I've encountered, so a war would likely be with them. Of course, first I have to expand to the space harpies, which we also found earlier in game. So I've been building up a couple of ships steadily. Of course, I'm low on mining or on minerals again, on metals, but that should change soon as we are getting a lot more income from metal than we had before. So
Yeah, and mines are relatively cheap, and you have quite a bit of money there. You could rush mines on some of your planets and perhaps deal with your metal.
all right, that's actually something that we could do as well. Is there? We're still building a mine right here, so we can buy it. There we go. So it'll only be one turn. We could rush a mine over here actually, instead of another. There we go. So that should help a bit. In the meantime, we're continuing our research towards fusion warheads. Those will pack an extra punch for us. And there we go. We increased our mineral income, our mining income for quite a bit again. So let's continue on. One thing I quite like is that when you switch buildings in the planetary management, or for example halfway constructed, the progress is actually saved. So you're free to hold the construction on one building on the lab like I just did just now, and get a mine through first, and then just continue construction. You're not actually losing your progress, which is quite a nice touch.
Yeah, I mean, we're never interested in punishing the player for playing the game. Um, there's threads and threads and threads on topics going all the way back pre-EA in terms of just how to manage production, and I think we've settled on a pretty good compromise. But we wanted to be closer to Mutu than Civ in terms of having a system where players would be free to adjust the buildings that they were working on, and not feel like the game was punishing them for changing their minds or making an adjustment. And one of the most recent patch features made the it didn't actually change the mechanics, but it changed the UI, so it's now more obvious in the production screens. In the cases where you have some production that is saved up or cached for a particular project, you can now see it as an overlay.
Yes, that's also something definitely to note. And right now I'm actually in combat with some of the initial Star Harpies, so I hope I can use my
So you've
stars.
gone for the bombard strategy, so you're gonna stay at range.
Yes, usually I must admit I'm more of a I prefer to use like the mass drivers or use the regular
get in
cannons.
close.
Getting close, do a lot of damage, which I think fits the having lots of small units Ural style quite well. But I thought I'd change it up and do some significant.
And you estimated well. I wasn't sure if you were going to be able to take out a harpy with a single salvo, but you were. So that's what it took. If you had grouped your fire, you would have killed one, but then you would have perhaps lost ships once they closed to knife range.
Exactly. It was a bit of a
now you're good,
but it worked out.
It did. It worked out.
So that was just a short bit of combat, and obviously that was very simple part of combat because no shields were involved, no boarding action was involved. We all used the same, or all my ships used the same type of damage, But of course, as you go on and as you unlock more technologies, and if as you build bigger ships as well that have all these different kinds of weapon systems on there, it gets a lot more involved. And I've seen battles as big as like 25 ships on each side. So, is there a maximum to the size of battles actually?
No, and actually, if you get really absurdly large battles, there's a little bit of code there that's very rarely used, but is in the game, that will make the playfield larger to accommodate
Okay.
arbitrarily large fleets. So, I haven't stress tested the engine recently to see how many ships you can actually fit before it starts to crash, but lots, I think, more than anyone has been able to build, and we've got some um, fairly intense fleet builders
Right.
in the player base. So,
Okay.
um, yeah, there's no functional limit.
So I'm actually offered the chance to get a good impression with the Orphan. They are in need of some extra food, and they want 10 food for 10 turns. So I'm at plus 22 at the moment, so I can definitely spare some. And I think that will help me keep the peace long enough for me to take out the harpies and expand the, to my west. So let's do that.
Yeah, you can afford it.
Let's be friendly. And I think I'm going to move back my fleet actually. One of the less happy things about the Orphan is they're actually moving in with a colony ship to the system I just cleared the harpies off, and I was hoping to get myself.
Yeah, so this is another small feature that people have been suggesting, and that we're thinking about ways that we can implement to, at this point, be able to warn them off, to say, hey guys, this is really my favorite star system, and please don't build a colony here. Though actually the way it will probably be implemented in game is if you kept some military ships there when the Orson came in. Right now, when they go to build their colony, you'll have an option pop up that will say they're moving to build a colony. Shall we intercept? And if you intercept, then you
Right.
destroy their colony ship, which is an extreme solution. I think there should be a third button that is go home or else. So if you hit that button, perhaps you take a small reputation hit with the Orson, but they would then get the message that you really don't want them to take that planet, and would be willing to resort to force if they wanted to press the issue.
That would be a very nice option to have in there, definitely.
Fortunately, though, well, maybe. Are you going to beat their second colony ship? They're spamming a lot of colony ships towards that world. They started with the ice planet, of course, because
they got the other
they
one
like
as
ice
well.
worlds.
I did manage to beat them to it, so I did the fighting and came out empty-handed.
Well, you're a great ally.
Which is very smart diplomacy from the Orphan.
They have benefited greatly from your hard work.
Yes, but at least we learned that my missiles can deal with harpies.
Well, they could deal with 3. You've got a set of 5 or 6 in that other system?
No, I got. Yes, there are 6 in the other system, so I'm building a couple of extra ships right now. I have some decent reserves of metal now, so I can continue producing a bit more.
Yeah, and if you have, and if you can launch 1 salvo per harpy to start the battle, that should about deal with them, because harpies being unintelligent creatures do not have point defense systems.
Right, so
It's
that's
a safer missile.
Actually, I should be redesigning my ships since I just researched some nice new warheads. I think.
Or are you up to fusion?
I am up to Leech.
Oh, Leech will not be super useful against harpies. It would be useful against because it's an anti-shield tech, or at least if it's working properly, it should be an anti-shield tech. But fusion,
Right. So what I'm gonna do then is I'm gonna use one leech on my torpedo destroyer. I'm gonna use one set of leech missiles and 3 of fusion missiles.
Yeah, so you'll take out their shields if they have shields. Yeah, now you're getting up to the point where if you spammed a lot of those torpedo destroyers, you could probably take out the out the super dread, though it has a lot of point defense.
Okay, so you really need to swarm it and make sure all your torpedoes and missiles arrive roughly at the same turn.
Either that or do something other than missiles. Where I mean, you're in an interesting situation now because one of your opponents, the Star Harpies, have no point defense whatsoever and are thus really easy meat for a torpedo-heavy design. But if you do want to take out that point defense heavy super dreadnought, you're either going to need an absurd number of missiles or build some heavy destroyers or something that would have
you know what? As we're running into
some rail guns or something on them.
Into the end of the stream, I'm going to wait the construction of my new torpedo destroyer, and then I'm going to try and engage the.
So all of our speculation about whether or not this will work will actually come to a natural resolution.
Find it out. In the meantime, we're just going to continue researching. I mean, we are going to be running out of time anyway soon, so that will be a nice thing to see if it works. So there we have it. So we have 3 torpedo destroyers, one of which actually has the fusion missiles, and we have 3 advanced destroyers which will have torpedoes and missiles.
And are battle proven against harpies.
So they have high morale. Alright, let's send them in. They're gonna be performing stockpile, that's fine. We still have our sad little colony ship actually at the other planet. Let's just colonize something else. Alright, so we're gonna defend against the super dreadnought. So here it is. It's really good looking actually. Lots of guns and systems we can see on there.
And pretty blinking lights.
So we're just gonna launch everything we got at them.
They have Orson style lights on the hull, which are also show up that same light style on the Stargate, so you can get a sense of the. It has something to do with super advanced energy management.
Wow, those were some point defenses. That happened so quickly.
So there's lag in the stream. How did it go? I see a lot of missiles?
Let's just say that not a single hit has been.
Oh no! Super advanced point defense.
A couple of hits for no effect. That will probably be.
Yeah, that's probably the leech because they don't actually run.
So the one thing
shields.
We don't actually need to make it hit. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if you were a little tricky, you could maybe sacrifice a destroyer and hope that. Oh, I saw one get through there. You did a little hull damage, but now you're soon to be out of torpedoes.
Yes. So when I'm out of torpedoes, I'm going to move up my ships and self-destruct.
You did a little more damage. All right. Yeah, I mean, the problem with hanging back here is that you're letting the super dreadnought use all of its resources against your missile swarms.
Right.
If you had closed with your own missiles, then you might have distracted it a bit.
Actually, we managed to get it.
Oh, you got it?
We got it.
You got it with your point defense mass drivers?
No, well, yeah. In the end, it was we got enough missiles through with the final.
Oh, yeah. You managed to double up your swarm. So yes. You launched, then you moved forward with your missiles and launched again. All right, well done. Congrats, victory.
So that is going to be concluding this stream. Nice. I've never engaged a super dreadnought before, so that was not a bad experience. Of course, capturing it would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah, but you would have needed
worthwhile.
Very different tech choices to make that work. You don't capture ships with massive missile salvos.
Well, that sounds reasonable. So thank you, Sven, for joining us and for discussing the game. And thank you everyone for watching. Sorry for a bit of technical issues at the start. We're gonna obviously try and prevent those from happening in the future. If you have any feedback on the stream itself or on the game, please let us know. Drop us a line, head over to the forums, etc. And of course, if you're interested in the game, head over to the Steam page. The link should be right underneath this particular stream, and give it a shot. So thanks again, Sven, for watching, and thank you everyone, and we'll be seeing you again next time with another stream. Thank you. Goodbye.